characters. So I'm just going to do a follow-up movie review for the Fear Street series that I recently watched, and this one is going to be the second outing. This is Fear Street Part 2, 1978, which was a really good middle chapter to the trilogy, and I probably would say could have been the strongest part of the trilogy, but I probably did opt for the first one just because of the Scream overtones, and I'm a massive Scream fan from the 90s. So I'll focus on this one though. This is 1978, and it's got some huge Friday the 13th vibes, and sort of 80s sort of slasher horror vibes going through this. So it was a pretty interesting part of the chapter. I thought the most action-packed as well, which was really good, and it does fit in quite nicely as well in the story with the characters we already met in part 1. So it does. I will say that this one, unlike the other three, does act like a bit of a separate entity to the other two movies, where I'll do a review of the part 3, 1666 shortly, but that one kind of overlaps with part 1. Whereas this one is very much, although connected, more of like a standalone sort of story within the trilogy itself. So I enjoyed that quite a lot. We have Sadie Sink, who is the lead actor in this. She is known for Stranger Things. She's playing Ziggy. So Ziggy, the character, is known as C. Berman in the first movie. So this is the lady who survived the witch Seraphia's last possession and last outing of madness in 1978. And how the last movie left off was that Dina and Sam and Dina's brother had contacted a C. Berman, really to find out how do you defeat the witch and how do you bring this curse and possession to an end. And effectively, she tells them that they had to die. Whoever was touched by the witch had to die. At the end of the first movie, it was Sam, and then they brought Sam back with the use of EpiPens and CPR. However, she then was possessed by the spirit of Seraphia, the witch. So the film follows on then with Dina, her brother, trying to elicit the help of Ziggy to try and find out is there a way in which they can unlock all of this and go back to how things were before, and just basically take the possession away from Sam, Dina's girlfriend. So you do have the initial part and the end of the movie where you've got the older Ziggy, played by Gillian Jacobs, and you've got Emily Rudd playing Cindy, who in 1978 is the older sister to Ziggy, and Sheriff Will Good is in the movie as well. The younger version is played by Brandon Spink. So I thought he was pretty good actually, that young boy, the actor in this as well. But yeah, Sadie Sink, the lead actor, you can tell she's a high quality actress, and she's done some good work with Stranger Things already. So it was excellent to see her pretty much carry the film on her own as well. I thought she did a really good job, to be honest with you. So we followed on then, and C. Berman, aka Ziggy, is pretty much telling the story about what happened back in 1978. So you have a camp, very similar to Friday the 13th. You have a sort of getaway summer camp for teenagers called Camp Nightwing. This camp is more or less like the Friday the 13th camp with Jason Voorhees. Very similar, sort of, your late to your 70s, 80s era outdoors, Americana style holiday, and a couple of weeks away from the parents type of thing. So, and in the start of the movie, you do see with the introduction to the young Ziggy, that sort of shady side versus Sunnyvale rivalry carrying on from the first movie into the tales of the past with this one as well, where they literally, it's quite shocking, they were going to pretty much lynch the young Ziggy because at the start of the movie. That was quite shocking actually to see that, and he was actually luckily stopped in time. But going off from that, there's a lot of the plot thickens very quickly, and it starts to carry on quite well. We're introduced to a bunch of characters. Like I said, you've got the young Nick Good. You've got Cindy, who is the sister of Ziggy. You have Tommy, who is then the partner of her sister, and then you have Alice, who is there's a bit of a relationship with Alice, who is the former friend of Ziggy's sister, and there's a bit of a sort of a bit of a former friendship, sort of awkwardness and tension running throughout the movie as well. But then that does get dealt with, I think, in a pretty good way later on in the movie. So so we've got another character who is Nurse Lane. So we're introduced to this character, and this Nurse Lane character, one of the very few adults you ever see at one of these camps. They're always got to be a bit creepy and a bit weird, or I never really understand why the adults are never in charge. It's always like all the teenagers in charge and younger teenagers and these things. It's quite bizarre. But anyways, this Nurse Lane, she's a bit messed up, or a lot of the kids sort of floating some rumours around about her, about being into sort of the Seraphia witch, and they find that she actually does go crazy and attacks Tommy, who is the boyfriend of Ziggy's sister. More like the sort of the good-hearted, sort of morally right sort of jock guy, good-looking jock guy in the sort of the troop of all the teenagers and the counsellors, the older teenagers in the camp. But unfortunately, later on, as they'd all suspected, that they do find some documents related to the witch Seraphia. Nurse Lane's, I think it's Nurse Lane's relative had been killed, and she's suspected by what was the witch Seraphia had created one of the many Shadyside serial killers, and lost a loved one because of that. So researching into the Seraphia, the witch, is what took her down that path. We see then later on that Tommy does get possessed actually by the spirit of Seraphia, and this is where then you get the 1978 main serial killer. So in the first movie in 1994, you had the sort of Skullface, aka Scream Killer, and in this one then you get the Nightwing killer, who effectively is like a Friday the 13th Part 2 Jason Voorhees character, which I thought he was pretty good villain actually, and he was in Part 1 as well, very albeit briefly, but this one he's the main villain in this one. And I will say he does sort of attack the camp, and there is a bit of a rallying, and you would think at some point there would be strength in numbers, particularly when the older teenagers gather up the younger people at the camp as well. But I will be honest, I was quite shocked to see that they sort of ripped up that sort of cliche of everyone being on their own and all sort of individualised and being picked off one at a time. That didn't really happen. He did go after the main sort of bulk of people who were congregating together as well. And at the same time this was happening, you were having quite an interesting development of a couple of pairs of people then. So you had the young Nick Good with Ziggy, who they were sort of, and it's obviously sort of alluded to that they are interested in each other, albeit Nick is a little bit, maybe a couple of years older than her, and the other pair then being the former friends, which is Cindy and Alice. So Cindy and Alice pretty much get caught at the ground running away from Tommy, the killer, and they stumble upon what looks like, I can only think is like some sort of massive sort of organ thing on the floor underneath the camp, which is effectively like the hub of where the evil is emanating from. and they come and they find out that the witch is that's where the power is sort of being derived from. Very similar to the first movie, where they crash the car and they then sort of get the flashbacks of the witch Seraphia as well. Then, but yeah, so the movie develops a little bit further, and they start putting pieces together about how to solve it. Nick and Ziggy, try their very best to try and end the curse and try to save as many people as possible, and to reconnect with the lost people there, like Ziggy's sister and Alice as well. But I did think that those relationships were pretty good, actually, when those pair together, and the former friends who actually reconnect and become good friends towards the end as well, then, which is Alice and Cindy as well. I did like that. I did like the ending as well. So they were alluded to the previous sort of serial killers over the years. I think there was one from the 60s, there's one from the 40s and the 30s and 1800s and 1700s and so forth, going all the way back in time, where the witch had sort of raised a little bit of hell, with killers over the centuries and decades, and towards the ending, when you do see, trying to understand what do they need to do to break this curse, because there is a point at the end of the movie where it's kind of like, well, they've done everything, they've tried to find every way to end it, and they just, unfortunately, there is no happy ending type of thing, and you're thinking, God, how are they ever going to get out of this? And they find the hand, so the hand was cut off of the witch Seraphia, and in the original part 1 movie, you did have the body was found by Dina and Sam in part 1. In this one, they find the hand of the witch Seraphia, and they think by reconnecting them both that they can somehow break the curse. But what happens at the end of this movie is, and it leads into it sort of plays back on the ending of the first movie in 1994, is unfortunately Ziggy and his sister pretty much cornered by all of the serial killers, and you can imagine what happens. But fortunately, Nick, the sheriff, does CPR on Ziggy, and albeit even though she's been stabbed to shit, she manages to be resuscitated, and she is no longer sort of a targeted victim for the witch, because she had died, and albeit come back from her heart being stopped and dying, and come back to life from the CPR by Nick. So flash forward back into the modern day, which is the 1994, and the plan then, Ziggy, the grown-up version of Ziggy, Gillian Jacobs, and Dina, Sam, and her brother, then to reconnect the hand with the body. So you've got the big tree in the middle of the shopping mall in I think it's Shadyside shopping mall, where the first movie, where the very scream-esque opening scene from the first movie is, and they plan to reconnect that together. Where it leads straight into the third movie, I did like it straight away, was that when they did reconnect the hand to the body, Dina's nose bled, which is the sign of either of the possession or of the sort of the flashbacks and connections with the witch. And then Dina is back in 1666 as the witch Seraphia, which was a nice little lead into part 3 as well. So yeah, I mean, overall, this film is good. I really enjoyed this one. It is a standalone, very much like part 1 is laying the groundwork for the trilogy, whilst being a good sort of homage to the 90s slasher horror, like Scream, I Know What You Did Last Summer, and Urban Legends. Whereas this one is very similar to the 80s sort of Halloween, Friday the 13th, Nightmare on Elm Street generation as well. So this was a brilliant standalone version, so I really enjoyed this one. I do have a personal bias and preference for the first, so overall I will give this rating for this one as 3.5 stars out of 5. But as you can see, here the IMDb rating is 6.7, which isn't too bad, around the same sort of level I would give it. But it's the best rated Fear Street section actually out of the three. So you've got there 88% rated by the critics and 81% by the audience score. I think 3.5 pushing to 4 stars is pretty fair. I will settle on 3.5 just because if I had to choose between the two, part 1 1994 and this one, I would probably pick part 1. But this one in its own right is pretty good. So yeah, enjoyed this one. I hope you enjoy it as well. Check it out on Netflix as well. It's a brilliant movie, and I'll be back.